Welcome everyone to a new event in this series about career pathways for PhDs. My name is Marie-Claude Felton. I'm the TRaCE McGill project manager, along with Chantal Tauvet, who's also here today. Today we have the pleasure of receiving two doctoral grads from the Faculty of Law. Right now, I'm just gonna hand you over to our two moderators, Atagun Kejan-Lioglu and Miroslav Sadowski. They're both president and VP academic of the Graduate Law Student Association. And so it is my pleasure to hand you over to them so that we can start our session. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, Felton. It's a pleasure to be here today. The structure of the panel would be, we will turn to the panelists first, and then we will, with Miroslav, we will ask some questions for about 30-40 minutes. And after each question, panelists can answer the question in whichever order they wish. And then we will open the floor for questions from the audience, and you will be able to ask questions to whoever you want to ask a question regarding their career path, or your questions about your own career path after graduating from our DCL program. Do you want to add anything, Miroslav?
Thank you, Marie-Claude, for organizing this. Well, I think you explained the model perfectly, so without much further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers today, DABI, DCL 2017, and Kent, DCL 2016, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. Okay, Kent, why don't you start first, since 2016? So.
Thank you very much, Miroslav, and thank you, Marie-Claude, for this opportunity. I'm really glad to join you in this event and to share my experiences and my pathway to where I am currently. My name is Kent Nadozi, as Miroslav has indicated, and currently I am the Secretary of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, which is a specialized convention that was adopted under the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. We're based in Rome, and the focus is on food and agriculture, but the fact that the Secretariat is a convention that adopts international standards, international rules, and international regulations on how genetic resources for food and agriculture are exchanged and managed and governed globally. That is why my role, and at least my training as a lawyer and as a jurist, was needed to be in this position. Something when I started, my pathway to this point was when I graduated as a lawyer. I was practicing mostly in environmental law, but over time migrated into biodiversity and environmental protection, so to speak. And I felt that my role, I could play a much larger role in international governance and setting international standards for the governance of the environment. And then based on that, I applied to the United Nations to work with them, because I thought and I felt that while commercial practice is lucrative, but also I could make a much more impactful difference, working in international diplomacy and international law. So briefly, that is where I am right now, and then I would certainly give you additional details, and I'll give the floor to Dea to give a brief introduction of herself. That's what she do.
Thank you, Kent. And thank you to the organizers, obviously, for this invitation. My name is Dea Dabi. I am currently a professor of law at the Université du Québec à Montréal in their Department of Legal Studies. So I teach in French. I do research in French and English. I won't start going down the route of bilingual researcher, but it's very much a way to keep both sides of my brain occupied and quite busy. So I graduated, as Miroslav said, in 2017 and have been occupying my position since 2018 at UQAM. And I know we'll come back to some things prior to other training, but prior to my position at UQAM, I also was an assistant professor at the Leiden Law School in the Netherlands, where I worked in an advanced program for children's rights. So that was an interesting complement to my current role. And I also, after leaving McGill, did a postdoctoral fellowship with the Religion and Diversity Project at the University of Ottawa. And not all of those things happened in the same order as one would think normally. But that was also part of my pathway, I guess, if I can put it that way. And last but not least, I'm a Quebec trained lawyer as well. And so I still am a member of the bar, but not a practicing one.
Thank you so much for these introductions. I'm going to ask the first question to both our panelists, if that's okay. So I'm curious, what made you, come to the DCL program at McGill at the first place, and what did you have in your mind when you started this program about your career options after the program?
Should I tell Dej? You want to go?
Of course.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Well, first, the attraction was McGill in and of itself, as an institution, an entity. Doing the program in McGill was very attractive. But in any event, I think the main attraction was while after some private practice, and I didn't think it was stable for me, I started working with an international institution in Kenya then we had a joint activity program on intellectual property rights and food and agriculture with the faculty, then with the Center for International Intellectual Property Policy, which was, of course, David Lamette was the director then, and Professor Richard Gold as well at that time. So we had a joint activity with them. So there was an opportunity, there was a grant from SHERC then, and I indicated to Richard, Professor Gold, then that I was interested in doing a PhD to further my, my potentials and my prospects in the international governance arena, and that I thought that it was a way to help me put into proper perspective the things I was dealing with on a daily basis, because of course I was dealing with much practical, pragmatic, diplomatic issues as the legal officer for that institution. So I thought doing the doctoral program would help me put in a proper perspective and fully understand essentially what the conceptual, intellectual, and philosophical I would say underpinning of some of the actions of the states and the major role players in the arena was. So there was that opportunity, so I decided to pursue it, and because I had intentions to go further beyond that, because what the institution I was working was more regional, but I thought it would be like a springboard to go to a much global position, and that certainly helped me to do so.
Like Kent, I also had a previous experience at McGill before becoming a doctoral student there. I was an Eisenstadt Fellow at the Center for Human Rights and Legal Pluralism prior to entering the doctoral program, at which point I got to work with quite a few professors and got a better sense of the lay of the land, as it were. And the doctoral program itself obviously was of great interest, because McGill's reputation already at that point. I think Kent and I started perhaps around the same years, but there was already a good doctoral there are a decent number of doctoral students in our cohorts, and so there is quite a large community, and it made for very interesting and different kinds of exchanges. And I know we're going to get into the community aspect a bit further on, so I won't expand too much on that. But the way that the program was structured was appealing to me insofar it was not super course heavy, but it allowed me to seek out more training without being overloaded with classes, and allowing me to also continue with the research that I was already that I had already undertaken. As some of you may realize, obviously, I'm a Montrealer. I've done all my degrees either on this side of the mountain or the other. And so to come back to McGill for my doctorate to me seemed like sort of fulfilling the, closing the loop, as it were. It made the most sense to me. And given my interests in constitutional law and religious diversity and children's rights, it seemed like the best place where I could be to engage with those questions in a community of scholars, and allow for enough place and space to reflect on them more broadly. So prior to my arrival in the doctoral program, as I said, I had the fellowship, so I had a bit of a sense of the research centers that were already up and running. I'd already had the privilege of working with quite a few other professors in the context of other projects. So I had a good sense as to the professorial core already before setting foot there as a prof. And I know that not everybody has that option or privilege, but I think it did comfort me in my decision-making even more, and made me feel like McGill and the DCL program was really the right choice for me.
No, indeed, if I may follow up on that discussion, yeah, the experience I had as well was that what I thought was the practical experience I was having on a day-to-day basis fed into the academic work that I was going to undertake in the DCL program. So there was that mutually reinforcing feedback from practical experience to the academic intellectual aspect of it, even though it was, from time to time I had to switch my, my paradigm. Being in a diplomatic community is a different setting from an academic community where, yeah, the accountability is much, stricter than then the ways of expression and articulation are different. But certainly the experiences I had in practical day-to-day, work that I had was certainly sufficient. I mean, was certainly, beneficial in doing the thing. And then the academic work certainly helped me put the conceptual frame to what and understanding and interpretation exactly what I was witnessing on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Ken. I hope that the academia was also quite diplomatic. Sure. Oh, moving on to the next question. I think that the one that every DCL candidate secretly dreads, about the transition to the job market, and how did you end up doing what you're doing right now? I think Dia, if you could start perhaps with.
Sure.
I think you're
as I said earlier, my first job actually before finishing my DCL was with Leiden Law School. And so I finished my doctorate while teaching full-time in a country I didn't know, away from pretty much everybody except for my husband. So I know that can be quite a dislocating experience for most, and finishing a doctorate is hard enough as it is without the other added pressures. So I got that job in mid-2015, and we moved soon after. And I had an agreement with my department at Leiden that I would be able to dedicate at least a day or a day and a half a week to finishing my thesis. And so there are things that you can work out with your employer so that you obviously get to the goal of finishing your DCL, which is obviously the goal, before fully committing obviously to your other work. But it's a hard transition, and it was definitely it was challenging. Prior to leaving, though, I'd had quite a few meetings, both with my supervisor, Colleen Shepherd, but also my committee members, to figure out sort of the track and trace out the next few months before I finished, about a really tight deadline that was mostly self-imposed. I think that both my supervisor and my committee members were pretty relaxed about it, but I felt that this was important to have set up before leaving to show that I was very serious about finishing this within the time frame that we had agreed. And so that was my first jump or foray into work before even finishing the DCL. The contract was only for a year, so we came back and then I started teaching as a lecturer at UQAM, which I think was also beneficial to perhaps me getting my current job. And then around the same time started a postdoctorate with the Religion and Diversity Project. And in the context of that project, having finished my doctorate and sort of putting that behind me, I was able to undertake field work on a particular project and sort of just turn my brain really back to research for about a year, which I thought was really beneficial, and was able to, well, I'll have two publications for my postdoc. And that's something also in the time frame. So if you're not, and I maybe we'll come back to this about strategy later, but I found it really beneficial to have a postdoc because it's one of the only times where you're going to have only time to do research, and that you can capitalize on afterwards, because you can have publications moving forward in the year or 2 years after, if you manage to get a position after you become a prof. And those things allow you to breathe a bit better through the transition, if I can put it that way. And if I may, I'm still reaping the benefits of my time as a postdoc. And it also gave me another kind of qualification and training, namely in qualitative research, which I already had a background in, but it allowed me to sort of re-up it, as it were. And I think that was also beneficial to me ultimately getting the position that I have now. And the position I have now has been my position for the last 3 odd years. And I've been able to combine both my interests and teaching in constitutional law, but also advanced research methods. So a lot of stuff about qualitative training and classes on religious diversity and comparative law. So it's been sort of a very slow journey, but the various pieces make more sense now than they perhaps did in a segmented way. So that's been my not so straight point to here.
Yes, and then for me, it wasn't so much a transition as more like being able to balance an integration of both my work life and academic life, because by the time I left the job I was doing in Kenya and then came to do the first 2 years of studying within residency. During the time they were negotiating the convention or the treaty that I now had, then I had to do a bit of consultancy for the negotiators to support them. And then when the treaty and the convention was adopted, they asked me to come and assist in establishing the secretariat with a number of people. So essentially, while I was still doing my PhD, I was shuttling back and forth between Rome and Montreal to do that. So then when they appointed a new head of the place, he asked me to stay on to assist him with the transition. So at the time, that took another 3 or 4 years. So he had to leave. So by the time he left, was up at the point I was finishing my PhD as well, so my doctorate. So they asked me to come and act as interim head, right after that. So that's essentially because I had already finished my doctorate. That's really put me in a position to do that. So since then, this was like 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago. And then after a year and a half, they confirmed me as the head of the convention to continue doing the work. So it was essentially, totally assisted me in that respect. And then, my knowledge, the knowledge I got and the research that I did certainly helped me a whole lot in managing both the secretariat and the processes and fully understanding them, putting the processes and the different positions of the countries and their both their motivations and aspirations and what's the underpinnings of what they do and why they do what they do was extremely beneficial in really governing the both the procedural, but also the the regulatory aspects of the work that we do. So for me, that was here. The whole thing was a combination of both, essentially combining both the work and the academic work at the same time, which I guess we'll talk a little bit more how you balance that. It was a bit, yeah, it was quite tough, no doubt.
Thank you so much. I'm actually going to pick up where you kind of left off and ask about your, work-life balance during the doctoral program, but also at your current job right now. How do you manage that balance? And well, it can be like, if it's personal, but are you happy with that balance in your life as well? Like, if you're, I mean, we all manage our work life somehow, but sometimes the question is if you're actually happy about the balance that we were able to find. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Ken, do you want me to try to go first?
All right, thank you very much. No, well, if frankly, it's not a balance. I don't think you can really realistically balance. It's a juggle, I would say. It's a matter of how which one you take. Intermittently, give priority from time to time. For me, at that time, was balance. Was juggling between family life and academics and work. So it was so it's a matter of having to do some kind of sequential prioritization over time. Over time you give a priority for timing blocks of time to something and to give priority to one. And it was extremely difficult to balance all three, both life, work, and academics. I must admit, but now it's a bit easier because is dealing with just the job and the family life, and that's and as head of the institution, it gives me a bit of flexibility in terms of managing my time, and much as it is quite demanding, but I have a bit more control over that. But during when I was doing the program, yes, it is. While you can do certain things at your own pace, but certainly you don't want to overstretch, the time, and that because of the intensity and the load of the work that is required. Because the longer it takes, the more difficult it is, really. So it's certainly much better to try to concentrate the work and finish it as soon and as quickly as possible.
I think also during the doctoral studies, I mean, it's a point where we're considered a masters of uncertainty, because our doctorate could take 3 years, it could take 5 years, it could take 6 years, it could not finish, although our rates are pretty good at McGill. And I feel like we kind of have to be okay with things being a little in flux all the time. And I mean, if anything, I think the pandemic has shown that. And I think, although I'm not sure everybody will agree with this, I think doctoral students are probably amongst the most resilient because they are used to uncertainty all the time. And so this idea of being currently in a situation of uncertainty, that's more or less what we deal with all the time. And both from an emotional perspective, but also an intellectual one, where we're never sure about our ideas and how we're framing them. And so I think that if I come back to this idea of work-life balance, I think that doctoral students, and especially at least the ones that I dealt with when I was doing my doctorate, kind of just roll with it. Some roll with it better than others. And I think the pandemic has also shown us that, Monday can be Saturday or any other day of the week. So we could technically work every single day. So it's important to find our own, I wouldn't say balance, but points where we can say, I'm okay with stopping here for the weekend and actually enjoying some part of it, doing something. And feeling like we can give ourselves that time. And I know that that's not always obvious, and there are always financial considerations that might be hanging over our heads, which can make things difficult. And I'm not talking about going on trips necessarily, but even being able to just be able to go outside and not feel guilty about taking 2 hours off for a walk, or a walk with a friend, or something that has, or just completely zoning out on Netflix for more hours than you should. But, you know, these are all things that you have to sort of find the proper balance to for yourself, and your idea of balance may not be your colleague's idea of balance as well, and that's okay too. And I think it's very much, that's part of finding yourself within the doctoral process. And I don't want to come off all weird and like personal growth-y about this stuff, but it really, I think it depends per student. And I mean, I have a very, I won't say a bad habit, but I work very early in the mornings, almost all mornings, because that's the only time where everything is quiet. And I know that most people won't work like that. But you have to find what works for you. And obviously in the context of the pandemic, the places where I usually work, notably cafes, where that's where I write. I never write at home. This has been really challenging for me in terms of finding new places and new places of balance. I don't write at my office. I don't write at home. And now I can't write where I used to write. So I can only imagine that this is very difficult and challenging at this point to find spaces where we can feel like we can have a balance between our personal lives and our work lives that are suddenly smushed on the same couch. And that also comes, I think that that's obviously been put front and center this year and part of last year already for everybody. So this idea of work-life balance, I think that Kent said it right with juggling, but it's different for everybody. You know, there are variations on it. But you have to find the right model that works for you. And the other thing I was thinking of before this panel today is I took a lot of little mandates on the side, not because I had to financially, but because I was interested in them. And I think that it's great to have opportunities, but only take things that you're interested in. Don't take everything that's offered to you, because then you won't finish your doctorate as fast, but you also may not be able to finish all the projects that you're working on. So try to be strategic about the choices you make and the projects that you embark on. Because I think those can also be a really interesting way to engage with research and graduate studies in a totally different way.
No, indeed, I think there you touched a very important point when you started on this aspect of being able to choose, you know, and decide what is important and what you give priority to, you know, at any point. I think that's something I have benefited from in the course of the work. But what I know is that the proposal you wrote at the beginning of your program is not what you end up with, for sure. You know, you will indefinitely, almost definitely migrate into something else and end up with totally different thing, because while you're in your initial research, you know, work, there are all sorts of incredibly interesting pathways you could follow. But the thing is that, you know, establish the discipline to decide that this is what you want to do, and you just stick to those to that particular, you know, set of issues or particular, track or pathway for your research, and it helps you later on in deciding because when you do all the work, there's a lot of demand on your time and your being, so you have to decide what is important for what you're doing at that point in time and your core objective, which is your thesis proposing your program and what's the questions you want to answer, because there are lots of other questions that will arise that would, you know, attract your attention, that would seem so interesting and enticing to push you, you know, at the same time. So the thing is that, okay, you have to at some point decide that, look, you have to just ignore everything else and focus on that. So it is that discipline that you acquire from that process that also helps you subsequently in your ability to deal with the demands and being able to juggle both your life work, you know, life issues and work demands.
If I may also add on that before, and I'm not sure if this is coming in the next round of questions, I also had a writing group that helped. And so we were 4 doctoral students in the same year in very, very different topics in law. So someone was in IP, someone else was working on migration issues, someone else was working on environmental law, and then there was me. And it was a very nice community, small community. But we had, I think, quarterly meetups where we read each other's work and commented on it. And that was the way to find another form of balance in a program, and ensuring that, you know, we didn't get lost down a rabbit hole of jargonistic stuff like Kent talked about as well. And it allowed for us to have other touch points than just meetings with our supervisor or our committee or the classes that we may be attending. So I think that those little pockets also can be ways of finding a better balance, or some kind of balance that can be meaningful in the long term as well.
Okay, and you were right. Actually, the next question is about what's the most challenging and what you found the most helpful during your DCL studies.
I can just maybe elaborate a bit more since I brought this up already. So our writing group started, I think, in the first year after or during our class with Mark Antaki on theoretical approaches to law, and continued for 3 years. And we had, as I said, quarterly meetups, sometimes a bit more at each other's houses. Obviously, I know in a context of a pandemic, that's not feasible. But I think there are other ways to organize this right now, if that's something that you're interested in. And we were able to comment each other's work. And I think it was helpful as a way to move forward, because there were other people aside from you who expected to read your work. Sometimes your supervisors can be very demanding and expecting your work, but other times they may forget about you or leave you for a few months, where you really need someone to kind of say, I'm waiting for something, you know. So that was a way to kind of give another incentive in a different way, in a non-competitive way. It was really constructive for all of us, and forced, I think, all of us in our own ways to think about how we bring about our topics, how we research them, how we can make them better, but also maybe what are some of our blind spots when we have, you know, we engage with people from different areas in law as well. That's a good way to sort of put them to the test. And the writing group culminated in 3 of the 4 of us writing an article that was published at the Dalhousie Law Journal on doctoral studies from the inside out. And so it was another way to sort of process all of our doctoral legal emotions, I guess, as it were, and see what works within the programs and what not doesn't work, but what maybe works less well or what can be improved upon. I'm not sure what we would do reading it 5 years down the line. We're all profs at different universities right now, but maybe there's a part 2 at some point to be written. But I definitely found the community was helpful. The other thing that I found helpful was the coffee hour, which I don't know if it's still going or going in some way or another, which I was responsible for 1 year. And it was a nice way to engage with community more broadly, and in a very non-coercive way. I mean, it's pretty much as relaxed as it could be in terms of topics and people. But it was just a way to make sure that you're not in isolation, that you see other people, that you talk to them, and just know that you're not going through the doctoral process alone.
Yeah, indeed, the doctoral process could actually be a lonely journey if you let it be. Of course, you're individually and personally accountable for the work you do, and you have to self-direct yourself at the end of the day. But following up from what Dare said, is the only way, one of the ways you can actually make it much more productive and less lonesome is by engaging with colleagues and engaging with others. There are 2 benefits from that. First, you know, when you share frustrations with others, and you know that the others who are going through the same ordeal as you are, it actually gives you a bit more, you know, consolation that yes, you know, you're not alone in that journey. There are others who are also on that you know, tough journey going forward. But at the same time, you also share and exchange tips on how you deal with you know, such problems. You know, whether it is how you program your time, how you deal with supervisors, the sequencing of your submissions to them, such little tips certainly help. And that's very beneficial when you deal with others, because those are things that will make or break your the length of time you spend finishing your DCL. So learning those little tips from others and how they deal with them is something that is quite useful. Don't think that because your thesis focus is different from what others are doing, that you don't have anything to benefit from them, but that community certainly helps as a support group, but at the same time also a learning process to learn from each other. Because while the supervisor has gives you a certain academic intellectual guidance, but there are also all the practical aspects and the frustrations you deal with on a day-to-day basis. They may not fully identify with those. So it's your colleagues and people, your peers that would who are going through the same process that can share them and the exchange ideas and tips on how to certainly deal with them. So the core challenging thing, of course, is because it is you on your own and by yourself, much as you get guidance and overall supervision from the supervisor, but you determine yourself, determine the pace and determine the intensity of your own work. So if you're not self-motivated, it becomes problematic. But once you're able to, to collaborate and relate, and interact with other students who are going through the same process at the same level, that makes it a lot easier to go through.
If I may actually add on that, I also spoke to profs who are in different universities. Some of them were extremely gracious and read excerpts. Either I remember my DCL proposal, for the initial examination, and so yes, community of doctoral students, but also don't forget that you're in a city where there are 4 big universities that have a lot to offer, and you may be able to find someone who has a complementary expertise in another university close by. And I think that if you can, it is something to take advantage of, because it can only be beneficial. Even if you don't agree with them, I think it's still a good way to sort of challenge your ideas and see what sticks and why not, and how you can justify your arguments better afterwards as well.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna ask one last question and then open the floor to questions. And my last question is actually, what made you choose your current career path, and to what extent your DCL experience was the defining factor in that choice? Was it like the DCL experience that kind of shaped that choice, or your pre-DCL experience or qualifications that made you think that I'm going to do this job, or that made it possible that you landed on that job?
Okay, yeah, well, for me, I think for me it's the other way around actually, because I already started on a career path, and then DCL program reinforced what I was doing, and certainly made it get more clarity, and certainly put me in a position to assume higher responsibilities and position in the United Nations. So it's not so I don't think it was well, it's a bit different from a typical if I had gone through the academic program straight from both undergraduate to graduate to doctoral, then it would be a different thing. But right after my initial master's program, I went to work in an area that I loved. So it was in the course of that work that I thought it would be certainly beneficial for my further progression in my career path to do a doctoral program. Yeah, so my natural interest in both environmental related issues, protecting the environment and nature and biodiversity, was something that led me into working in the international organizations that are concerned with environmental protection and biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. I was, as I said previously, in private practice, but I didn't think it was something that was consistent with my, I would say my approach, my mindset, and my I didn't have that. How would I put it? I didn't think it was, was what I could do in private practice and commercial practice, which was a whole lot more aggressive and different from other areas of legal practice, which involved both international governance and standard setting. So I thought my interest in environmental protection could be better basis for my career. So I started working that area, and that was the basis for my doing the doctoral program. And that's in the end also reinforced backwards in reverse my career path and progress in my current position.
For me, the doctoral program confirmed what I already had thought, that I would like to stay in research and or policy. Through the doctoral program, I was able to obviously benefit from certain teaching fellowships and mentorships that were in place. And so I followed the formula of the legal education seminar, the mentorship, and then the teaching fellowship. And I do believe that that in part contributed to an edge I had for one of my positions, because I already had substantial teaching experience in a recognized university, albeit in a controlled setting because we co-teach. But it allowed me to sort of put into practice a lot of stuff that I had already learned, but not really understood in the right sequence, because I taught before and I didn't know why I did certain things, and then I understood why, and then it made sense afterwards. But I really do think that for me, the doctoral program and obviously the doctorate, the DCL at the end, confirmed my choice of careers. And I'm very recognizant of the experience and the time I had at McGill, and the training that it gave me moving forward as well. And a lot of the teaching tools that I use are things that I learned at McGill. And so I feel like, I bring a piece of McGill with me, not very far away anyways, just down the hill. But it did really solidify my sense of a research identity and a teaching identity in my case.
Yeah, thank you both for answering mine and Atagun's questions. And we have some excellent DCL candidates among us today. And I'm sure that everybody wants to ask at least one question. So please feel free to unmute yourself or write on the chat and ask.
I have a question. Thank you so much for your contribution. It's very interesting, especially having both aspects of possible career path. So thank you so much. I have, first of all, a question about academia in this case. I was curious. I talked to my supervisor, and he told me, I focus, let's say, in international law broadly, right? He told me that one obstacle that I may face as an international student who focuses on international law is that I don't have a background in Canadian/Quebecois law, and I'm not trained here, right? So this may be an obstacle. And moreover, my focus in international law may make me an interesting candidate for smaller law schools, because they may be more interested, understandably, in core courses. Would you say that international, I know that is from here, but maybe colleagues, would you say that their experience is much more difficult, or there are anyways like a path even for international candidates?
It's a really good question. And there are a lot of doctoral students who seem to be working on international law, both at McGill and at other universities. And so there's quite a large pool of people, even though you have your own expertise. I think your supervisor was right in saying that it's challenging for someone who doesn't have training in the local legal context to obviously be able to say, suddenly I can offer torts or contracts or whatever. I think you could, however, offer other types of classes on foundations and things that are not necessarily local context specific, but you would have to see how you can sell your candidacy on that point and say, although I am an international law expert and scholar, I have a secondary interest in XYZ. And that it gives you an edge when you put yourself forward as a candidate with an international law background and an international scholar more generally. So that's one way. Otherwise, there are like methods classes, but those aren't really understood or appreciated the same way. So I don't think I would necessarily put that forward as an argument. Otherwise, there are obviously graduate classes that you can offer in a much more broad spectrum, but you want to try to have at least one kind of core class that you can teach at the undergraduate level. It may be not a base class, but maybe it's a second or third year class. You can sort of see about how you position it. One thing that you could do if you are interested in staying in the Canadian and or Quebec markets is look up scholars who have similar backgrounds to yours and see what kind of classes they end up teaching as their, I'll call it their bread and butter class, aside from the international law classes. And that's a way to sort of see, well, how have they pitched their candidacy such that they're interesting for their international law expertise, but also because of X. So that would be a way I would see moving forward. And if, I don't know if you do any field work or not, but that's also another way that you can try to bring your candidacy and show that it's not just an international law candidacy, that there's a different approach to it as well, and something else that can be added to the law school.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, indeed. Well, if I may as well. Well, of course, I didn't go down the pathway of academics myself, but international law is something that's, you can also apply, not necessarily teach. So you can also consider the possibility of looking at, the United Nations or the international system as a way of applying your knowledge, depends on the sector or the aspect of international law you're dealing with. Whether it's international human rights, international child rights, international environmental issues, international atomic, or nuclear energy, aviation, all those are, additional areas that you could even consider looking at applying the learning and the experience you get from the your program.
And if I may just add also, there are a lot of DCLs who are like Kent, very well placed in international organizations, and with whom you could connect to see how they got to that path, if that's an interesting path, but also see just how to sort of navigate, because I think from what I've understood, anything international or the UN system is very hard to navigate, much like academia. So if you can have a few people to sort of give you some guidelines about how to go about it, I think that that's also really beneficial to this process, because a lot of this is not known publicly, either from how to apply for academic jobs or how to apply for UN type jobs. So I think it could be beneficial.
Any other questions from the audience?
I have a question. So thank you very much for sharing your experience and sharing your insights with us. That is quite important for all of us here. So I'm a doctoral student approaching towards the end of my degree. And so perhaps in the similar position, many of us would wonder about, especially for academic work, because that's what I'm thinking about right now. So probably my question would be to Dia. about the recruitment process, if you could give more insights about the process. We know that research is very important, publication is very important, but what about the other components, like, for example, references? And I heard that receiving, reference letters from one institution makes you look amateur. So how to cultivate maybe referees that can be, strong in that will make your application strong. The other components, if you could really reflect on from your experience, I would appreciate to hear that. Thank you.
Those are some really good questions. First of all, for any academic job, there are three components. There's teaching, research, and then there's service. Service is usually the least appreciated, if I can say, of the three, but also is relevant. Service is anything from sitting on university committees to sitting on particular committees in your, for instance, if I take Isabel, who says she's in international law, some kind of international law association, that kind of stuff, that counts for community work. And so they want to see that you're able to do all three. So again, we're coming back to this idea of juggling. So you have to be competent in teaching, or at least have some teaching experience. Show obviously that you're able to do research and finish research projects. That's something that's really important. That you're able to bring something to term. And like I said, service to a lesser degree. So those are the three components that you would make shine in any application letter. As for referees, that is always a really delicate question, and I'm not sure how much I can get into this because this is being recorded. But what I can say is obviously you can try as much as possible to have frank discussions, with your supervisor, to ensure that the letter is not a generic letter, that this is appropriate to the position. So you can give, they're all very busy. You can give them a few hints on points that you would really like them to bring up or make shine. Obviously, it's their discretion if they do it, but at least you can try to help them along in the process. Some profs share the letters also with their students. So not everybody does this, but they will send the letter that they have written as a referee to the student as well as the institution that they're sending it to. I've only had that happen once or twice. So you never really know what's sent out. And I got to sit on a hiring committee this year, and so I got to see the other side of it. And for the most part, the letters are very supportive. But if someone is writing letters for more than one candidate, then you start to see, well, I'm going to try to give some signals about which one I think is maybe the most well-suited candidate for the position, which is a bit awkward for everybody involved. So for referee letters, I had obviously my supervisor, I had someone from another university with whom I'd done my master's and I collaborated with on many projects, and I'm still collaborating with today. And the third person was another person from McGill, but with whom I had done research, but I had also taught with. So you want to try to find referees that are complementary to the position that you're applying for, but also to your candidacy. So maybe not all three of your committee members, maybe try to find other. So if you've had a work experience that you can draw on, that you know that you can get a positive reply from, that would be one way of showing you don't only have an academic background, but you're able to show that you also have a relevant work experience. So those are ways of sort of putting the things together in terms of the content. In terms of the actual hiring process, each university differs in the way that they do things, which is not helpful to you, but the types of materials that you have to put together are relatively the same each time. So you need to have a CV that's up to date and coherent and without footnotes, without typos, and obviously footnotes would not be appropriate in a CV anyways, but you want to try to, sorry, it's the afternoon. So you want to have a clean CV that you can pretty much be able to turn out. Some universities in Europe like to have short CVs. So you may have a short CV that's 2 or 3 pages, and then the one that I would send to anywhere in a Canadian university, which is over 10 pages or something. Don't limit yourself in terms of what you put in. You're going to need a cover letter, obviously, and that is something that gets only better with time. Much like the comprehensive proposal that we write for our doctorate, the cover letter also matures with time. I kind of cringe and think about the ones that I first wrote, but this is something that you can pass to other people for comments. You can get examples from as well. I remembered one prof had shared a cover letter of someone who had applied for position, just so you could see how to structure the things, how you bring pieces into perspective, how you bring them into dialogue to showcase your candidacy without repeating things that are going to be elsewhere. The other part of a file that will be asked, aside from at least one writing sample, and then you obviously choose a writing sample that's strategic to whatever you're applying for, is a research proposal or program, depending on the university. And there, the idea is you first say, well, this is what I'm working on now. This is what I plan to work on, for instance, in a 3 to 5 year horizon. And here are a few examples of types of projects. Again, each university and faculty is going to go about this a bit differently, but you'll be able to use elements of whatever you develop, I think quite helpfully from one to the next, though the packaging might be a little different. And then the last point, and then I promise I'll stop talking, is all about interviews. So you apply for the job, you may not hear anything for a while, you think, what is going on? Hiring committee has to get together, they have to evaluate all the files, this all takes time. And during that time, we're still teaching, we're still doing research, we're still supervising our students. So it's not something that's going to happen from one day to the next. Some universities have only one round of interviews. Other universities may have telephone interviews first, or Zoom or whatever, and then a short list where people are called in for a job talk. My position at Leiden, I had 2 online interviews, and the last one I did in person when they brought me to Leiden for it. So it can be quite a labor-intensive process. It's a really draining process. And as some of you are already abroad, maybe less of an issue, but I was doing interviews at 5 in the morning to account for midday over there in Europe. I have colleagues who interviewed in Australia in the middle of the night. So you kind of have to, you kind of adapt as best you can. I don't know if that sort of answers your question. I'm happy to discuss more or answer anything else afterwards.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we were supposed to finish right now, if I'm not mistaken. But
Yes, but I think we
Yeah,
can.
I think there.
Yeah, there
Yeah,
are 2 questions.
I think there are 2 short questions, so
Yes.
if Kent will be so kind as to briefly respond. And
Yeah, indeed. Yes, I was going to point out there were some questions in the chat that both Lin Cheng and Isabel posed. Well, first, the question about levels that you could apply to answer as a doctoral student. It differs from agency to agency and a broad range of interests of the applicant, so to speak. There are doctoral students who come in even as interns to know the system, to understand how it works and be able to see where they can position themselves. And there are also candidates that come in at a much higher professional level to come. But ideally, I would recommend any person who has spent all those years of labor and study and learning should not waste that opportunity going for lower level positions, unless they're really, really committed and mission oriented, that they want to really contribute to humanity at that level, to come at a much lower level, realistically. If you must, I would advise, following on from Isabella's questions, you can apply, in the course of your preparation of the study, you can apply for short-term internships within the institutions you're interested in. So that would give you an ability to at least get into the system, understand how it operates, and then that experience will certainly count towards your your ability to get considered when you apply for jobs subsequently. But that experience is typically useful. While it is a lot of emphasis on how many years of experience you've had in the field or in the work area, but the fact that you have this qualification and the training you've undergone and the discipline you went through in doing your doctoral certainly counts for a lot. And I would say it also depends on the agency first. If it's like really law and legal oriented agencies of the United Nations, like the Human Rights Commission and things like that, yes, you can of course get directly into it. But if there are like development oriented, the United Nations Development Program, a UN Environment Program, or the Food and Agriculture Organization that has a whole lot of other technical areas, yeah, you can fit into a range of positions there that that aligns with both your study interest and the research work that you've done, whether it is in the governance of oceans, fisheries, forestry, education, culture, intellectual property rights, the whole broad range of studies and academic research can actually be applied in different agencies of the United Nations. So, but ideally, you should look for in a really relatively mid to high level professional position with the training and the qualification that you have. Because there's an attraction depending on where you're coming from. That's even the slightly lower level ones. The remuneration is very attractive at that level. It's the temptation to go there, but certainly it determines your further progression. Because if you enter that much lower level, it diminishes and minimizes, I would say, limits the ability to grow further, further in the system. So to be able to get that, if that's an area of interest for you, I think is in the course of this your research that you can actually lay the foundation for that. Find the agencies that are relevant to your area of research. Do very short internships, 3 months, 6 month internships with them. And then that will give you an idea of how the system works, and also establish your experience and link to the different institutions in that area, so that by the time you finish, you're able to say, look, okay, I'm conversant and I'm familiar with how the system works, and I can apply my knowledge and training to the service of your institution.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Answers. I think this brings us to the end of this panel. I would like to thank our panelists, Kent and Dia, for this wonderful panel. I think it was very interesting for me. I hope it was the case for the rest of the audience as well. So I'd like to again thank TRaCE McGill and Dr. Felton for organizing this panel, and again thank all the audience and the panelists for being here today. Thank you so much.
Yes, I also want to thank our moderators, Atagun and Mirosa, for your wonderful work, and also to our panelists, Professor Debbie and Dr. Nadozi, for taking the time to share their stories and insights with us today. It's important for current students to know that there is indeed an after doctoral studies, right? And that there are many ways to make the doctoral experience more fulfilling and your transition also a successful one. On behalf of myself and Professor Paul Yaknin, the TRaCE McGill Project Director, I want to thank you again for attending this session, and we wish you a lot of success in your own career pathway. Thank you.